Today, this has been 2 weeks since our last Fitness Snobs podcast. I was away on vacation in Mexico, soaking in the rays. If anyone's watching this on YouTube, you might see that I'm not wearing a shirt. I'm outside right now. It's probably plus 10 in Calgary right now. I'm trying to save this tan for as long as I can. But today we have on Jonathan DeWolfe from DeWolfe Performance and Health. So Jonathan he's a strength, mobility, and nutrition specialist. He has certifications in many different things like FRC MS, FRA, FRSC, can stretch PN1, FDNP. Lots of you might be wondering what is those terms. We're going to dive into those things later on. He's a Team Garner nutrition coach, and he has some experience working with Charles Poliquin, the late and great. He's learned a lot about their program design through them. He started as a trainer in 2011, so he's been doing this coaching, personal training thing for a long time, over a decade now. So we brought him on today to kind of find out a little bit more about him, hopefully learn a little bit about his processes in terms of athlete development, assessment, periodization, what he thinks is good for up-and-coming coaches in terms of continuing education, a bunch of different things. So I just want to say thank you, Jonathan, for coming on and giving us some of your time to talk shop.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm looking forward to it.
No worries. Okay, so let's start this episode by just asking you, how did you get started in personal training? When did you get started in personal training? What kind of drew you into this industry?
For me, like you said, I started coaching back in 2011, and it primarily stemmed out of a poor execution for me with training in the gym, struggling with sports training myself. Like many coaches, they typically, find themselves into coaching or training because of their own personal struggles. So the long story of my upbringing, I moved around a whole lot, and basically getting into sports and athletics was what kept me out of trouble. So I'm sure this will come out in the podcast, but I'm rather obsessive when I come to doing things. So when I was young, I did a whole lot of skateboarding, and I was really obsessive about that. And then when I went into junior high, I got the first opportunity to start playing hockey, and I became very obsessive about that. And I would practice and practice and practice, shooting pucks and skating and everything that I could do to improve my hockey skills. But then naturally, as I got older and started to play higher level hockey, it became really apparent that my foot speed was a big problem. And I, researched how am I supposed to get faster. And that's where I started to learn about sports performance and stuff like that. And I had some good teachers in high school that had sports performance programs. So I started kind of delving into the idea of getting more foot speed. I mean, I'm only 5'9", so if you're 5'9" as a hockey player and you're not lightning quick, good luck. You're going to get smashed around. And that was essentially kind of for me was, I had a lot of good hands and shooting and all that stuff. But as soon as you start competing against guys that are faster, you can't really leverage that skill anymore. So in grade kind of 10, 11, and 12, I started really trying to figure out this gym stuff. And I'd read online, I'd talk to my sports performance teachers and all that type of stuff. And post high school, I was playing junior hockey, and same sort of thing. I realized that I had a big constraint of speed, and I started getting into the gym. And the transition for me in sports was I wasn't going to make the NHL or become a professional hockey player. I wasn't really gifted in that way. But, I sort of got bitten by the iron bug where I really enjoyed training and what it did for my, my mental health and my esteem. And I just really enjoyed it. So then I started delving more into that. And when I was 18, I took a personal trainer diploma in Calgary. And that really was the start of my career. And
Awesome. And in terms of the personal training diploma, who was that through?
Yeah, so I actually went to a school in Calgary called Elevated Learning Academy. So funny, it's been around quite some time, but I was actually in their very first ever class. And essentially, when you did that, you came out with a personal trainer diploma, you got set up with a practicum
Yeah.
post doing the schooling, and that's where I got my first job.
Awesome. And where was the first job at?
Yeah, so I worked at a company called World Health Club for
Hmm.
almost 10 years, like just
Wow.
leading up to COVID. I was really blessed to go there because this particular gym that I went to was the Edgemont location, and Edgemont World Health had a really good reputation of having some of the most skilled and knowledgeable trainers from that company working there.
Yep.
So me again being the obsessive person that I was, little 18-year-old brown hair, bushy tailed boy comes in there and, it was like getting thrusted into this environment where I had tons of great mentors and I was, bugging everybody constantly about, learning different aspects of training.
Hmm.
And it led into a lot of mentorship opportunities that, really changed my career because you come out of school and often people will think like, okay, I got my certification, I got my program design, I know how to do this. And then all of a sudden you start working with clients and you're like, wow, like I know nothing. Or what I learned maybe is not as applicable, or maybe it's even outdated, which I think is one of the challenges that people run into.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Did you from when you started in high school, kind of learning how to kind of improve your own kind of athletic development in terms of quickness on the ice and all that? Was it much different, that type of training, compared to what you started to learn when you went to Edgemont World Health?
Yeah, great question. So I think, uh, I mean, the first things that you'd go to, like learning how to train, is you go to the internet because, we're blessed with that uh, ability to get information quickly. And I bought a program from a guy called Kevin Needle. So he's actually super well known in the hockey training kind of community. And I bought a program from him and, it was a mixture of plyometrics and a bunch of good training. But
Hmm.
as will come out later in my assessment process, it's very important to be individualized to what the person's doing. So I had this idea I needed to do all this plyometrics and advanced training methods when it was like I basically couldn't do anything. I had no range of motion in any of my joints. I had no base of support for what I was doing. So
Hmm.
that time, I mean, I was working hard. And the thing is if you're 15 to 18, you pretty much can do any type of training and you're going to get a benefit.
Hmm.
And it may not be that effective or specific, but because you have literally no base of support and
Hmm.
foundation to move from, you start to build that. So for me, I basically would lunge really heavy weights was a big thing for me. So when I started doing training at Edgemont, uh, I had like big legs and strong legs because I didn't know how to squat or deadlift, but I would just get the heaviest bar I could and just lunge until my legs were like destroyed. And that was okay. And then I was really lucky because after being there for the first kind of year and learning from all the trainers, I quickly gravitated towards a fellow named Barrett Donovan. So he was kind of my first like strength coach guy that
Yeah.
really put me on to Charles Poliquin's training. And Barrett was a fun guy because he'd train you hard and he didn't care about your feelings. So he'd humble me like constantly and
Hmm.
making sure I did everything really correctly and properly. Like he had high standards. So I think that was
Yeah.
like that first time for me realizing like, okay, like this guy has results. He gets results with his guys. He has a specific method and model behind what he's doing. And, that's something that I really gravitated towards. And the training was quite different, right? Because it was like you have no structural balance. You can't full squat, you have no mobility in your hips. So we're going to address kind of those things first.
Yeah, it sounds like he just had a little bit more thought to his programming, a little bit more base, like you said, of the fundamentals that you kind of required in order to make progress over the long term.
Hmm.
Is that Barrett from Evolve? A
Yeah.
different Barrett?
No, Next Evolution Athletics. Yeah. No,
Okay.
he trained with him for probably 3 years, something like that. Like that was really where I started to I started to get results first and foremost before I was just running around like no method to my madness.
Hmm.
And, I started to learn a bit more about just strength training in general. And, Barrett was regarded to be the most knowledgeable trainer and especially well respected in our business, World Health, because he was the guy that put me onto Charles Poliquin's work. Like he'd done a lot of the PICP, which is the Poliquin Institute of Performance Training, and he'd
Yeah.
done, basically he was one of the guys that was paying money to go do continuing education outside of just the local area.
Hmm.
And so that was the huge thing for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's dive into a little bit about how kind of you mentioned Charles a couple times now, and I know he's been a big influence on you. Kind of talk to us a little bit about how all that started, where you went to learn from him, and kind of some of the main takeaways you got from him.
Yeah, no, uh, so again, my first exposure, I had never heard of Charles Poliquin. I had no idea who like really any of these like greats in strength training were.
Hmm.
And with coaching under Barrett and taking, those programs, I started to realize, okay, there's this guy. So I started following him online, like trying to look at some of his information. And then when I was 20, so I was like just a couple of years into doing my career, I got the opportunity to do an internship with
Yep.
Andre Benoit. And Andre Benoit and Charles Poliquin were kind of like, yin and yang, I guess you'd say. Like, Charles was regarded as kind of the best strength coach around because he'd medaled Olympians and got better results than everybody. I think 26 different sports he medaled Olympians in.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, it's never been touched to my knowledge. And he basically was like, he really revolutionized strength training. So his right hand guy, who he worked with for 20 some years, Andre Benoit, had offered to do a private internship for me and Barrett.
Yeah.
And so, I was 20, I borrowed some money, go to this internship, and it completely changed everything for me. It connected all the dots of like what I had done with Barrett, sort of gave me a base of how to program, how to periodize, how to assess. And those
Hmm.
2 days, I spent 2 days with him, and it just like, it totally blew the lid off my training. And
Hmm.
he gave me really good advice. And he said, John, if you want to be a world class strength coach and you want to work with tons of athletes and get good results, go and do seminars and internships. Like, don't just like learn online or locally, but go see the best in the world at what they do and
Hmm.
do those things. So basically, at that point in the time, it just, I was so excited, and coming out of that, I started, credit cards were a thing. I was 20 and I was making pretty good money, and I didn't have a crazy university degree debt. I just had my diploma that I was paying off. So I started
Yeah.
traveling around the States and Canada. I'd try to see Charles 2 or 3 times a year for different things, whether it was like athlete training and program design or some functional medicine and nutrition and stuff like that. And then during that time period, there was probably, I guess, between I want to say 2013 and 2018. I probably did 2 to 3 seminars or continuing education pieces
Yeah.
per year. And, a lot of that was with Charles Poliquin doing, again, all the baseline strength training methodology and nutrition stuff. And then
Yeah.
also I took all Andre Benoit's courses as well. And then I started to do some online stuff that I could get my hands on to, uh, basically work on some of the gaps that I was starting to realize in my knowledge.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's fantastic, and I think you made some great points there. I think a lot of people, they kind of nowadays, especially with the way things have been the last couple of years in terms of the way education is kind of now, it's a lot of it's kind of digital. I think going to the source and learning from the source can be much more valuable because not only you're building connections, but you're actually getting the most up to date information. Because well, you'll find in the strength and conditioning world, like people are continually updating and evolving their protocols and strategies for developing their athletes. Obviously, there's the fundamentals that stay the same, but there's
Mm-hmm.
these little nuances that are kind of like the little sprinkle of salt, little pinch of cinnamon to make the world of difference, right? So, no,
Well,
that's something.
also,
Go ahead.
with those. with a lot of those courses, like this is one thing I was really grateful to learn from some of the old school foundational people in strength and conditioning is you went and you trained, right? So every single time you did a course with Charles or Andre, it wasn't just like theory. It's like, okay, so we're going to lecture for 2 or 3 hours and then we're going to go and train and you're
Hmm.
going to get, put through the paces of what these workouts feel like, what these stimulus feels like. You're going to have lunch, then you're going to come back, you're going to do more lecture, and then you're going to train a second time. So you go to these training seminars and whatnot, and not only were you just learning about the theory, but it was like actually how to apply this, like going through these things and experiencing them firsthand. And as you would know from your training background, reading a program is one thing, but then like, actually going through the program is a completely another thing.
Yeah, because you see some programs that some coaches make for their clients or their athletes, and then you're like, there's no way like a human could actually do this, and there's probably a high chance that that coach would has never done that program. It's just like on paper it might look good, but
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember when I was at World Health in my later years, I started to do a lot of mentoring.
yeah.
I'm a huge believer in mentorship and teaching. The whole reason that I had success in my career was these mentors that I had. There's
Hmm.
tons of them at World Health, and then Charles and Andre and many others. And I wanted to sort of continue that pattern. I'm really passionate about teaching. And I remember having this colleague that was doing a program design mentorship with me, and I gave her homework, go write this program. I looked at the program, and then all I told her is like, I want you to do this today for your workout.
Hmm.
Because I looked at the program, I was like, this is going to destroy somebody's lower back, like absolutely annihilate it. And of course, in the context of who you're training, like if you're training general population clients who sit at a desk all day long, and then
Hmm.
it's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do triceps for your erector spinae. It's like, okay. So when that person's like in a wheelchair, like by set 2 or 3, and you're like, I don't know what happened. You like try the workout yourself because, there's a lot of learning that takes places in the trenches, like of actually training yourself or training other people.
Hmm. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Um, So you saw Charles, you learned a lot from him, and now, kind of in this day and age, 2024, are you still using a lot of the same things that you learned from him and Andre with your own kind of training of your athletes and general population?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm forever grateful for that foundation because when I look back to programs I wrote 10 years ago, they still hold up from a sound perspective for building a base. But
Yeah.
as anybody that takes more education and becomes more knowledgeable and skilled, you can kind of think of it like having a toolbox, right? And you add more and more tools to that toolbox, and then given the individual context of somebody, you dispatch those tools.
Hmm.
So later in 2018-19, I did education with Kilo Strength Society,
Yeah.
and that was with Stefan Cazot, and he worked with Charles and Andre and the Poliquin group and all these kind of people for a long time. And when I went there, it really connected all of my strength training knowledge into a long-term systematic approach.
Hmm.
So it gave me the idea of when to use which tool, especially in the broad sense of training people.
Hmm.
So still to this day, do I draw on things that I learned from Charles or from Andre or from Stefan Cazot. But now I sort of have shifted my paradigm a lot in regards to physical training to
Hmm.
including like functional range conditioning and functional range systems,
Yeah.
as it's kind of my belief that that's sort of the toolbox per se, and then all the tools sort of fit inside of that. Because delving into that kind of allows you to be very specific on what it is that you're trying to help a person with or do.
Hmm.
And the law of specificity dictates whatever it is that you specifically work at, that's what's specifically going to improve. So I
Hmm.
found that all that information was really useful, and I still use a lot of it. But
Hmm.
it's kind of that whole Bruce Lee thing, take what's useful and then reject what's not. And you can kind of prune off that information over time. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at now.
You kind of have you developed your own system over the years, integrating all these different systems from Charles, Andre, was it from Kilo Strength, and now from
Yeah.
FRC?
Yeah. Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about some of the, because you said now that the FRC is kind of your main kind of branch that you start with, and then everything kind of
Hmm.
fits within that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about FRC. Like, what is FRC from just kind of a broad overview?
Yeah. So uh, there's a group of people that run this thing, what's called functional range systems, right? So
Yeah.
it's this big global big system,
Hmm.
and within that system, there's subsystems. So the one that people are most familiar with is FRC, which is functional range conditioning.
Hmm.
So essentially, what they've done is they've taken a look at training humans as basically Homo sapiens and
Yeah.
looking at the deepest levels of how tissue responds to force, how we move, a lot of the complexities around changing anatomy. And they've built a system around how you do that in the most efficient and effective way possible.
Hmm.
So for me, throughout those years of doing all the Poliquin education and whatnot, we would use the term that I use now is I would call that the standard model of training. And this comes from the FRC people, which
Hmm.
is basically patternized exercises with the intent of training muscles. So we train muscles and movements, and we're trying to strength train and be able to lift larger degrees of force or produce more power. And we've used for a long time this standard model where we assign specific exercises or movements per se to attain that. Now,
Hmm.
with functional range systems, basically what the goal is to train the anatomy and to cover all ranges of motion rather than just confining somebody to a specific movement pattern. So, uh, in in a broad sense, before, if I wanted to improve somebody's hip, I would do unilateral hip training. So maybe I would do split squats or lunges or
Hmm.
single leg squats, things like
Yeah.
that. Whereas now, when I look to improve somebody's hip, I get more specific with what is the issue that needs to be improved on the hip. Is it a rotational deficit? Do they have weakness in particular ranges of motion? How can I really be specific about that? And then I do
Hmm.
exercises that train those tissues to enhance the anatomy rather than improve a movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have like your basic kind of strength training exercises, muscle building exercises, but you're using those primarily for patterning. So teaching someone how to perform different movements, but now you have more specific joint exercises that target more of the connective tissues, the tendons, aspects of um, joint mechanics like internal rotation, external rotation, flexion, extension, all those variables.
Yeah, yeah. So I think when I started to I was really into regular kind of standard strength training with all the stuff that I did with Charles and Kazoo and everybody else that I'd learned under, and I was getting really good results with them.
Yeah.
But what I started to run into is you'd find athletes or just general population clients that you'd train where they had injuries and limitations that wouldn't allow you to use this methodology.
Hmm.
So I had a colleague that I worked with for a lot of years, Brian Shimko, who he works at the Calgary Movement Studio. He's one of the owners there, actually, and he was the first person I knew that was doing FRC stuff.
Yeah.
And he was all excited about it. And I kind of looked at him. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like at the time, I was doing Olympic lifting, and I was like front squatting like almost double body weight. And I was like whatever. Like you want to do some real training, like all this flexibility and mobility training. This is nonsense. Like you
Hmm.
know, basically to quote Charles Poliquin, I've seen bigger arms on a chair. Like, yeah, like what? Get out of here, right? I had no time for it. And then over time, like I'm a results guy, so
Hmm.
success leaves clues and results leave clues, and you'd see him getting really good results with people that were pretty busted up.
Hmm.
And I did a internship out in Connecticut with Ben Prentice, and it was all on sports training. There was a few different strength coaches there that specialized in basketball or hockey and all this stuff. And I saw this is Ben Prentice. He had a bunch of athletes doing this FRC stuff, and I asked him about it. And he's been, training professional hockey players. He probably trained more pro hockey players than anybody, or at least he's up there in conversation.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, this is the best thing. Like he's, you know, like you want to use this as a component for training these things that people don't train.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in time, I started to, I would do the real training with my athletes. That's what I'd say. Okay, we'll do the real training. And then you go to see Brian to do like the bending training. And I thought them as separate things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas as I started to study with them, I started to realize that there are particular constraints that people run into, and it's always in the internal environment. So if I have a hip that doesn't work like a hip, and then I take my hip and I load it like crazy and I just try to lunge more, lunging doesn't improve the hip. Training the hip improves the hip. So you can become more and more specific on what it was that I was trying to filter my training inputs into, and being more and more specific. So basically now when I run through using FRS, and I start with an assessment where I'm looking for constraints. So, and when I use this word constraints, this is something I learned from a guy called Dan Gardner. He's like pretty much, I know you know Dan. He's like the smartest guy in the world. Like I swear,
Legend.
like he's a nutrition guru, lab analyst guru, really big mentor of mine. I met him with Andre Benoit, and he was doing nutrition stuff, and he's just on a completely another level. And he does this with nutrition and lab analyzing. And basically, the constraints theory that I'd learned and heard him talk about was this idea that all complex systems boil down to subsystems, and then all subsystems have individual component pieces. And when you look at something, you want to look at what's not working in the component pieces that actually hold back the system from reaching higher levels of performance. So when I start to look at athletes or general clients, if you don't have a hip that functions like a hip is supposed to, doing the squat is not going to improve the hip, but improving the hip will actually improve your ability to squat. So it kind of has this functional range systems, which improves human anatomy, and then the standard model of training, which is fantastic for, you know, generating more muscle tissue. Obviously, like if you want to get jacked, you're not going to FRC your way into being jacked. Like that's just not going to happen. If your sport is Olympic lifting or powerlifting, and you know that is a skill that is the training. Whereas to get better at the skill, you need to work on the skill. But if you work on sort of your components that develop that's kind of how I go about it now. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And I think this is where I'm going to ask you now, because in case people don't know, Jonathan works with high-level hockey players, and obviously they come to him, and I'm assuming they have a lot of issues that they're dealing with because they've been training for such long periods of time. Maybe they haven't been prioritizing their joint health. Maybe they've been doing just a lot of conventional strength training, squatting heavy, deadlifting heavy, and now they're like a little bit beat up. So how much, when they come to you, like how are you deciding how much strength training should they be doing versus how much more of the FRC system based training should they be doing? And then in general, obviously it's going to vary from person to person, but are you spending more time on the joint side of things now in 2024 and less on the strength side, or what's kind of the balance between those two?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really what I start with is a good assessment. Like any good coach is going to start with a good assessment. So I call this point A, right? So if I want to go somewhere that's a point B, I need to know where I'm starting from, right? Where's my start point? And in hockey, it's a mixed domain sport. So we know that you need a certain level of relative strength because not only are you hitting people, but people are hitting you. We know that you need power because that's a sport of acceleration. We know you need endurance and stamina because you need to do it more than once. And high level players might be on the ice every two or so minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. So we know like point B is really well established. But then how we get from point A to point B is going to be determined by what the person's constraints are. So what I tend to start with is I do what's called a functional range assessment. And this is something I learned from FRS and these FRC people, which is a very clinical assessment where I look at every single joint that they have and look at how it functions. So I'm basically looking for function on like with the context of what they require. So for example, when I train a player, like a skater player, the expectations I have for his hip is different than my goaltenders. My goaltenders need a very different kind of a hip than a player. So basically we start with the FRA to establish what their joint function is like. Now we measure that and go through that and then pick on the priorities. And then we also measure their strength capacities. So, some athletes you'll run into are too weak for their speed. So they're really fast and explosive, but their relative strength sucks, right?
Yeah.
And that's an important part of the power equation.
Yeah.
Or you'll have some athletes, and that's just me now, is you are too slow for your strength. So you might be able to lift a house, but your ability to have speed strength is poor. So you need to work on more stretch shortening cycle. That would be more like your plyometric type training, stuff like that. So basically we start this point A and then we look at that. Now, you asked about determining how much strength training they should do versus joint training versus mobility training. Now, it's my perspective and the perspective of the FRS community that strength is a behavior. So strength is a byproduct of your anatomy. So typically how most people define strength is they'll determine it by a feat of strength. So something that you can do. So like, how much can you bench press? How much do you lift, bro? Right? Like that whole idea of what you can lift. Now, we would view that as a feat of strength. It's a specific kind of strength that's constrained in a movement pattern.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is this, is if strength is a byproduct of anatomy, then we need to look deeper instead of at the pattern, but look at the individual. So we would say, and I would educate my clients that, look, and I've used this a lot with higher performance guys that I'll train, is I'll say, look, if being strong at squatting made you better at hockey, how come you're better at hockey than me? Because I can squat way more than all of you. I'm stronger than all of you, but hockey, you're better at hockey than me. So just by getting you better at squatting doesn't make you better at hockey. Getting you better at hip makes you better at skating, or gives you a hip that you can get better at skating on, and then you can move forward. So when we what I work on with a lot of people is shifting their paradigm to understand strength in more specific terms, because when we define it in such narrow perspective of like how much can you lift or how high you can jump or whatever this might be, those are all emergent behaviors that come from your strength determinants. And basically how I would look at that is you have two determinants of strength. You have your biology, and your biology, you can be specific in like your joints and your mobility. You can look at your connective tissue. So we call this architecture or scaffolding.
Yeah.
Or you can look at muscle output, right?
Yeah.
So those are our three sort of biology or our hardware, right? Yeah. And then on the other hand, you have neurological mechanisms. So how does my nervous system innervate into those systems? And how is the information sending going? So basically my neurological efficiency, my intermuscular coordination, my intramuscular coordination, all those type of aspects. So when I look at my athlete, I'm doing my point A assessment. Okay, how are your joints? How do things move? What are your current capacities? What's our point B? And then I'm saying, what time frame do we have? Right? Because in hockey, it's tough, right? Because you have like maybe 8 to 12 to 16 weeks a lot of the time to fit in all of these training with, again, the goal is to specifically change their anatomy. So what constraint can we work on that will have the greatest effect across all systems? Well, we know in hockey, again, hockey players have really bad hips. Their low backs tend to be a problem, their shoulders tend to be a problem, and their ankles tend to be a problem. So when I start to look at that, I say, okay, if strength's an emergent behavior and it's determined by the anatomy, let's improve the anatomy specifically. Therefore, those constraints start to lessen, or maybe they can go away. Sometimes we can obviously completely resolve these type of things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I imagine if you were to say what you just did to me now 5 years ago, you'd be like, I'm talking bullshit here. But I think you and I have had a conversation before where you've actually told me is you've spent very little time actually strength training movements
Yeah.
during maybe that 8 to 12 week time frame where you're trying to improve someone's anatomy. And
Yeah.
what you've done, you've tested their 1RM back squat day one, and you've retested their 1RM back squat 12 weeks later, 8 weeks later, and they
Yeah.
put 20 pounds on their squat without even squatting. So was that kind of like a hard for you to kind of wrap your head around that
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. When I first sort of embraced this, it was a big, like, I had, 10 years of like proven record with people, like getting results. And then
Mm-hmm.
it was like, okay, so now I'm going to solve the volume problem, because here's the problem, right? With hockey players and athletes in general, you have these different buckets, right, that they need to train. So if you think, okay, if I want to be a good hockey player, okay, number one, I need mental, right? Like my psychology, if I'm a mental midget, I cannot take stress, or I don't know the game. That's a very specific thing you need to do.
Yeah.
If I suck at hockey, I can't shoot a puck or I can't skate, that's going to require training. And then we have the physical capacity element, what we do as strength coaches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I look at the ecology of time, of effort, of the ability to recover, I need to then be specific. Okay, what output do I want? So then I'm going to be specific on my input. Now, if I've already realized that there's no relationship between, or I should say low relationship, because it's not that there's none, but this is something where people get into trouble in our field, is they use all their anecdotes of training untrained people as validation for their training methods. And again,
Mm-hmm.
you take a 16, 17-year-old and you can do really poor training methodology and they'll improve. And then as a coach, you'll see, oh yeah, I helped that person. They got faster. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
if they sat in a room tapping their foot as fast as they possibly could all summer, they probably would have gotten faster too. So
Mm-hmm.
with these folks, they take the best athletes in the entire world, the people that have already maximized, 95% of what they can, and then it's like, how do I move them? How do I move the needle there?
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at these movements, I go, okay, like we do have some correlation between certain exercises that I love and I've used for a long period of time that work well, but I'm going to start to be specific about how much volume I'm doing with them, because
Mm-hmm.
if I can increase recovery and capacity and I can drip feed in enough volume for stimulus, the people aren't getting beat up, right, all the time, where, because they might be skating like 5 days a week, like hopefully not, but often athletes will skate too much during the summer and they're doing, power skating and all this type of stuff. And it's like, if you're training like 4 hours a day and you don't have and you're just getting smashed in the gym, like you're squats and lunges and deadlifts and leg extensions and all these different exercises, and you're just crushing the tissue, you're not going to build very good capacity, right? So
Everything is kind of redundant. It's like, yes, they're different stimuluses, but at the same time, there's a lot of overlap between them as well.
yeah, and that's exactly it. Is being specific on your input. I mean, many people don't train their hip capsule. Well, the deepest structure in the hip is muscular connective tissue that does rotation of the hip. Well, you can
Mm-hmm.
hypertrophy that. It's just people don't see it, right? When you
Mm-hmm.
got big legs
Mm-hmm.
and like big quads, people see that. When you got big glutes, people see that. But the
Mm-hmm.
deepest structures in and around the joints where people get injured, right? You think
Mm-hmm.
of injuries, it's not like, oh, I tore my glute. It's like I have hip impingement, right? I have a bunch of pinching pain, or I tore my labrum, or
Mm-hmm.
I damaged my ligaments, or my
Mm-hmm.
tendon ruptured. Like these are the realms of where people are typically getting injured. So again, when I kind of like pull back to the ecology of training, I look at, okay, so I have my joints, my connective tissue, my muscles, my skill, and my energy systems. So all
Mm-hmm.
five of these things need to be trained. If they all need to be paid, and I only have $1,000, and I go to muscles and I put $900 into muscles, then it's like, well,
Oh yeah.
your connective tissue doesn't get trained, your joints don't get trained, your skills not getting trained as much, and you
Mm-hmm.
start to run a deficit. So then I would argue, let's pull back based on our assessment and say, okay, you don't have good joint function, and we know that's an internal constraint to skating. Or you have a bad shoulder, and when you get hit into the boards, you dislocate your shoulder. So let's make the shoulder more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes will have to do with muscle training, but more often than not, if that worked, people wouldn't be so injured. Like you see people that are lifters that are lifting, tons of weight all the time, and they do these until they get injured, they don't warm up properly, and then they get injured and they do like all this generic rehab crap for like 2 hours or an hour to get ready to do their lifting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you're just like you're taking a bucket of water and just throwing it at the wall and hoping that it's somehow going to improve where the dysfunction is. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, with a lot of people, you ask them what the problem is, and they have no idea. Like, I don't know, like my
Mm-hmm.
shoulder hurts. I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, let's be specific, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like in the earlier days, like those five buckets that you mentioned, like a lot of people put a lot of value on the skill stuff, on the mental components, on the muscular system, and it comes a point where by putting more effort into those, you don't get any greater return on investment. So,
That's right.
and you put more into those systems, you end up with more issues. So, and what you've mentioned before is like it's actually quite profound the minimum effective dose to maintain those systems are once you have them, if you've been doing them for a
That's
decade
right.
plus and you've been working, like when you work with higher level athletes, they're usually well trained individuals.
Yeah. Totally. No, that's exactly right. Because it does. It's a lot easier to maintain than it is to build.
Yeah.
You really don't need that much work to maintain that.
Hmm.
And again, when you boil back down to where people spend most of their time, it's on muscle training or skill training. Absolutely. Like, look, I've been baffled. I in the last couple of years, I worked with some athletes that from my previous years, like I said, this paradigm shift for me has been since 2020, 2021.
Hmm.
And prior to that, I'd been very selective on the athletes I'd worked with. I started working with people that were seriously injured
Hmm.
and people that were really like great hockey players. But in the weight room, I was like, what? Like, I've trained 14, 15-year-old kids that are stronger than these like 18, 19-year-old kids. And it just like, it shattered what my expectations were. And then
Hmm.
I would see them move and they just seem so uncoordinated. You go watch them play.
Hmm.
Unreal. Like great athletes. They know the
Hmm.
game, their skills, like all of that was like, well, that's why they're doing so well. Now, it's in spite of their physical capacity or lack of, which
Hmm.
is something that a good off-season or in-season training period can help with. But
Yeah.
realistically, like you could be the best weight room guy and just like you never get taken on a team because you suck, got no skill. But also, if you're the injured guy,
Hmm.
I mean, that's where a lot of guys get opportunities to move to the next level in sports
Hmm.
is, these guys can't keep healthy. And then you come into the lineup and then they're like, holy smokes, look at this guy. We saw this in the NHL a lot in the last couple of years with guys that were, got a shot just because of an injury. And then they ended up running with it. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like that there's that paradigm shift happening more and more frequently because people are kind of making similar um, realizations to you in terms of what is going to help keep that athlete healthier for longer so that they can actually sustain a long career in whatever sport they've chosen.
mm-hmm.
When you're working with your hockey players, what are some of the, I guess, the biggest deficits that you see, the most common deficits that you see, and how do you go about kind of addressing those deficits?
Okay, so that's a great question. So if we talked about point A is the assessment,
Yeah.
right, where we're going to look for these deficits,
Hmm.
and then point B in hockey, in sports, we define as optimal joint function for what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, a hockey player or a goalie is different. Then we would say necessary absolute strength, right? So again, a hockey player doesn't need to be as strong as a power lifter, but if they're really weak, that's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one would be reactive strength.
Yep.
So reactive strength, we're kind of looking at explosive strength and the ability to absorb force quickly. And then we have speed strength, which is then the discharge of force in a rapid way, right?
Yep.
So we know we want to get them there. So when I look at general constraints, the first thing with almost all hockey players is their hips take an incredible beating because they're in flexion all the time when they skate.
Mm-hmm.
So they end up running into very limited capsule space inside
Yep.
of the hip, and that will affect all motions of the hip. So basically, if my bones are this close together and I try to move, they don't move well. But if I have enough space in the capsule, then when this bone moves around relative to the other bone, I actually have more movement options available. So in hockey, we know speed is a function of stride length plus stride frequency. So stride length is constrained by your joint function. So specifically, we look at rotational deficits and a lack of hip extension because they have such tight hip flexors from being in that sort of crouch down skating position that
Mm-hmm.
all of the tissues that act on the hip become a limiter.
Yeah.
And
Is
then
there any, sorry to cut you off, is there, in your experience, any benefits to that adaptation that occurs in the hip in terms of
no,
that? Nothing at all.
no, I would say it's the opposite.
Okay.
I would say it's actually, that's why we're seeing such crazy rates. Like, I mean, if people look up what's going on with Patrick Kane right now, we're seeing athletes at a very young age need more and more massive interventions because not only are they getting these adaptations to being stuck in the same position, like if you don't move, you can't move where you can't move. So if I never move in a particular range of motion, I
Mm-hmm.
lose that ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the better you get at skating, the worse you get at hip,
Mm-hmm.
right? The better you get
Yeah.
at deadlifting, the worse you get at hip and spine. So
Mm-hmm.
when we think of that as like the base, like the general physical preparedness determines the point and how high that can go. So when we
Yeah.
look at it from a range of motion perspective, the injury rates are way higher. And then when we look at from a strength training perspective, if you don't have a good hip and you want to do exercises like full squats or power snatches or power cleans,
Mm-hmm.
you need prerequisites to do that. They're good exercises, but good exercises for who? Right?
Mm-hmm.
For whose hip, for whose shoulder. So when we look at that chronic adaptation, back injuries, hip surgeries, all these types of things are not really, well, at least from everything that I've seen, they're not really improving a whole ton.
Yeah.
And honestly, what ends up happening, and you do see this in a lot of professional sports, is people don't train hard because they're afraid to hurt them. Right? So it's like we don't actually train that hard because I don't want to be the person that's responsible for this person getting injured.
Yeah.
So
It's like it's almost like load management in a way.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Load management's kind of a whole. It's a backwards way of thinking about it, in my opinion, because
Mm-hmm.
basically how we look at it is that injury is an equation, right? So there's load and then there's capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at the tissue, and that's joints, connective tissue, and muscles, and the force that's applied to them is greater than its capacity, you get an injury.
Yeah.
If the load is equal, then we're getting some adaptation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can get stronger over time by building more capacity, load-bearing capacity on these tissues, right?
Yeah.
Then we start to actually bulletproof things. But then it's like, well, my hip is fine unless I load it this much. And it's like, well, just keep loading it this much. It's like, wait a second, what's the constraint? Because
Mm-hmm.
the
That's
body
the
isn't, well, the body's not going to heal like on accident.
Mm-hmm.
Like it needs good information to lay
Mm-hmm.
down better architecture to build more robustness in the tissue. We know
It's
this when people do good rehab and they have broken bones or torn ligaments, that their re-injury rates on bad rehab are super duper high, right? Whereas when you're very specific on that process, you can build more robustness to the system, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of someone losing their ability to flex their hip and restoring some of that extension, and obviously when you improve the extension, other ranges open up too. What does the kind of process look like for improving that within this FRC systems and subsystems?
Yeah. And just to correct that, is actually it's when you improve rotational capacity, you improve all other motions of the hip.
Okay.
So this is where I think a lot of people get it wrong with their assessment is they look at linear motion. So they look, okay, like how much can I lift your leg? Okay, your hamstring's tight. Or how much can I bring your knee to your chest? Okay, you can't go that high. So then we're going to take that tissue and we're going to increase its length, or we're going to stretch it, or we're going to strengthen it, right? And it's like, well, that's not the constraint. You need to go deeper. Like your understanding of anatomy needs to be better as a coach, that you actually understand a really deep level of where those constraints butt up. Because basically everything is governed by this capsule space. If my joints are too close together, I need to create more space. So what we use for that is we use what's called pails and rails training. So pails and rails training is really it's progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. So these are terms that they're terms that FRC has come up with, but they're not new concepts. They've taken the literature and they've looked at it and they've analyzed it and like, okay, so if we understand that tissues don't actually just get short, right? So people say, I'm tight. This is tight and it feels tight. And so, well, what do you mean by that? And some people will say, well, then it needs to be untightened. So we'll just stretch it. Or other people will say, well, it's tight because it's weak, right? And these things might not be entirely wrong, but they're, again, very non-specific.
Very
so
vague,
So we say, okay, well, what does this mean? Well, the thing is that tension that you feel is governed by your nervous system. So like when people have spasms or tissues feel tight and restricted, that's actually a function of the software of the brain sending a signal down there saying, this is not good. So we're going to kind of like hold that. And that's the whole thing in soft tissue. When people have knots and adhesions or whatever they want to call them, they have these like muscle spasm areas and I'm just going to rub the tissue. Oh, it feels better because I smashed it with a lacrosse ball. It feels better. Now I'll go train. And then what happens right immediately after? It goes exactly to the same place because you're not influencing the brain. So when we use isometric loading, pails and rails training, we're combining stretch physiology and isometric loading to build trust between the software and the hardware. We want to take those biological elements, neurological mechanisms, synthesize them together so that the body then starts to break into new ranges of motion and establish the ability to have space, right? And then we need to go in and fill it because, of course, isometrics are the be-all, end-all, but they're a really important tool in cultivating more space between limited areas.
I never thought of it like that. So you're saying that it's kind of like a dynamic duo between stretching and contract and relax?
Yeah. So we do it in a very specific way, like pails and rails training. You can kind of think of, so intensity, when we think of intensity in training, we're thinking of MVC, right? Maximum voluntary contraction. So your MVC, your ability to generate force, is the highest in an isometric contraction. So you can discharge tons of force. It's safe because there's no length change. So isometrics is a great way to train your brain. Now, what we do, and basically from what I've learned with FRC, is the research would suggest that you require 2 minutes in a given range of motion stretching to make it useful.
Yeah.
So how I like to explain this to a lot of my clients or Gen Pop people especially is I'll say, like, look, imagine you have something that you need to say and you're in a room full of people and it's really loud. Okay. I'm giving a speech. I need to get quiet, or I need to quiet everybody down so they'll listen to what I have to say. So we do 2 minutes of stretching at end range to start to build up stretch tolerance so that the brain's like, okay, this is what's going on. And anybody that's ever stretched, you start in an aggressive stretch, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like jumping into an ice bath. Like you're like, get me out of here. We want to back out a little bit and we want to coax this range of motion. We don't want to force it. So we coax this range of motion and then we get in there, we spend our 2 minutes, and this is like quieting down the crowd. Now the crowd's quiet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my isometric loading. Now in FRC, we'll do maximum effort training. So this is this isn't like, oh, I'm just squeezing down on the ground. Like if you've ever seen me with my athletes, like when they're isometrically loading, you got veins shooting out of their forehead. Like you're squeezing as hard as you would on a max effort deadlift or a max effort press. It's the same thing, because the body doesn't register the movement you're doing. The body works on force. So if I'm generating and discharging maximum levels of force from my brain into those tissues, and I progressively load that up, I'm able to affect the mechanoreceptors at the joint capsule level. I'm able to actually make a bridge of communication between the software and the hardware in such a way that we start to actually change the tolerance, so that, again, it's not feeling tight. I'm actually building trust in that range of motion. Therefore, it starts to become default range of motion. Because that's one thing I really don't like when people do mobility. What mobility training is, it's not a permanent change. Like, I'm not interested in how you move once you're warmed up. I'm interested in, you just woke up. How do your joints function? Do you have access to range of motion? Because warming up, you'll always have more range of motion. That's great. But basic fundamental motion, we need to establish that first.
I think it's an important piece you make is, yes, we can warm up before our sessions and gain access to different ranges of motion, but after that training session, if we lose access to those ranges of motion and we go about our regular day, the rest, for most people, it's going to be 23, 22 hours, we're going to be living in those kind of positions that aren't maybe best suited for joint health. So it's like, it's going to be tough to feel better for our joints have adequate range for a couple hours of the day, and the rest of the day they're just back to their normal tightness. There's going to be lack of blood flow. You're not going to be going to those ranges as much. You're less likely to maybe go into certain positions because you're in pain.
Well, and that's exactly like when we talk about specificity, right? Like if you're actually changing anatomy, you're changing anatomy, and the goal of training should be to change the anatomy. So as a strength coach and training hockey players, I want to change the anatomy in such a way that it's going to carry over to what they're doing with their body. If I want to change the anatomy for a power lifter or a general population person or a bodybuilder, if you take a bodybuilder and they can now access more tissue, well, if I can access more tissue, then I can hypertrophy that tissue more effectively. I can call on that tissue more effectively. Perhaps, having more range of motion and being able to bring more motor units, more muscle fibers into the action that I otherwise wasn't accessing before is going to improve my ability to pose. It's going to improve my ability to be healthy in the long term. And that's by changing anatomy and we get specific on, again, what that looks like for the person.
That's such a good point that you bring up about bodybuilding. Even for myself, when I did my first bodybuilding show a year and a half ago, by the time the contest came around, my joints were in so much pain. Like, posing was damn near impossible. My low back, my knees, getting down into those positions on the floor when you're hitting different poses. Like this time around, I'm prioritizing more of the joint ranges so that when I do compete again, I'll be able to actually be a better poser and be able to present my physique better.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because within the FRS, we have the FRA, which we talked about. FRC is kind of the premise on how we get stuff working better. But then we also have something that we call the internal strength model. And this is basically where we take the conjugate system of powerlifting and the joint training system and the standard model, and we slap them together to then be very specific on what qualities we want different tissues to be able to do.
Yeah.
So when I took this course, it's probably the biggest responsibility for shifting my paradigm on this. But there's a fella that works with them. His name's John Quint, and he is
Hmm.
a absolute unit. He's beauty, but he's like a physical therapist at Westside Barbell. So when I say a unit, like this guy's like a refrigerator. Like he's a lot of the FRC people, mobility people see, they're like, oh, like look, again, I've seen bigger arms on a chair. Like this guy
Yeah.
doesn't even train, right? This guy's massive, and
Hmm.
he works with as a physical therapist with some of the best lifters at Westside, but he also works with tons of bodybuilders. So
Hmm.
it's interesting, and that's something he talks a lot about is, again, when you do like a double bicep like back, I don't pretend I know what I'm doing with that. I don't know nothing. Oh, yeah. When you're doing that, right, having great external rotation makes
Hmm.
that posterior capsule, the rotator cuff muscles, really pop. So he does
Yeah.
all sorts of crazy high effort mobility with these just freaks, right? These guys, 300-pound jacked monsters, and
Hmm.
he's in there doing it. And it's crazy because, again, they've gone into those systems and they've taken their muscle training and pushed that pedal all the way down to the floor. And then how do their joints feel? How does their connective tissue? They're having to load manage all the time. Maybe they're spending hours and thousands of dollars on therapy per month because they got to need soft tissue work, the massage work, their supplements, their special supplements, all these types of things, right? So
Hmm.
it's
That's a good. That's such a common thing you hear in the bodybuilding community is like a lot of these 300-pound monsters. They see a massage therapist like every day, and that's going to add up financially. But if like you had some sort of system you could do yourself, it'd
Mhm.
save a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, and when I talked about like paying those different systems, the nice thing is there's a great way to use this system in conjunction with all other training you're doing. So again, if you're we've talked a lot about hockey players, which we have to be very specific and condensed because of our time frame. But if you're a
Yeah.
general person that's training day in, day out, month in, month out, long term, or you're doing against strength sports like powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, if you're
Hmm.
bodybuilding, whatever it is, you can intelligently and congruently run these systems together, and they actually will support each other because then again, it doesn't require a big energy withdrawal to maintain the health of your joints.
Hmm.
Just by doing in FRC, we use CARs, controlled articular rotations, as a way to maintain the health of the joint. You can use all these other aspects of max effort to acquire things you don't have, but you
Hmm.
can also just work on, speaking to those tissues. Because again, that analogy of like giving the speech, when I'm doing that and I want to create more space and access in a joint, I need to do that at a maximum effort level. When I am looking to maintain stuff, we know we can bring that intensity down
Hmm.
so it's not at a max effort. Maybe it's more of a repeated effort, but
Yep.
not to failure. I'm doing that, and you could do that, within the same session in between your sets. You could do it, the other hours where you're not in the gym, and then
Hmm.
it becomes more specific because I'm building more capacity. I'm building a better bank account. So instead of having $1,000 a month, I'm like, I got a lot more resources to dump into the training,
Hmm.
and yeah, it works out way better in the long run. And you're seeing, again, at a very high level, I do personally believe that in the next, handful of years, more and more and more people are going to start to shift over to this. And we see these different trends come and go with strength training and whatnot, but the basics have been around for a long time. And you're never going to neglect the basics, but again, if we look realistically, where are people getting injured, what's going on, let's be more specific, right? You can bias different tissues with skilled execution of exercise. Well, that's no different, right? In the other systems of the body.
Yeah. And then I think now, like the time that we're living in now, like there's so many new people coming out that are kind of specialized in these different areas, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where as a coach, as a practitioner, we can learn these different tools and then apply it to whatever situation that we're using it with our clients, whatever,
Yeah.
whether that's hockey, Olympic lifting, bodybuilding, soccer, whatever, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
living in a great time. So just to wrap things up, obviously we touched on a lot of different aspects, and I'd love to have you back on again to talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of FRC and some of the systems that you incorporate. But I know there's a lot of coaches that listen to this podcast, and you've had a lot of skin in the game for a long time. I'm going to ask you if you could give one or two pieces of advice for the up and coming strength and conditioning coach that's just trying to better themselves and do better for their clients.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've really enjoyed our chat. I'd love to be back. Um, So I think when it comes to newer coaches, so this is something that I've had a lot of different opinions over the years on this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll try to be concise and actionable pieces. But I think that something that helped me the most was having a really good group of mentors to work around. Now, this is a challenge nowadays with after COVID fitness, everything's changed a lot. You know, the big box model, stuff like that's challenging. I feel really blessed. I came into the industry at 2011 and I had a ton of great mentors at World Health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really smart guys that all had their different things. So then I'd go learn from our CrossFit guys or our Olympic lifting guys or the strength training guys or the rehab guys or whatever, and I would just bug the crap out of them. So then I've started
Mm-hmm.
to get more and more tools.
Yeah.
When I first started with my first mentor, he sat me down and he went through a list of industry leaders, and he
Mm-hmm.
said, follow T Nation, follow Charles Poliquin, John Berardi, Alwyn Cosgrove, Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle. Like he just went down this giant list of people. Go
Legends.
home, research these legends, right, and check them out, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing that, and then again, me being the obsessive person I am, I don't kind of do things. I'm like 1,000% in.
Mm-hmm.
So every single day I would be reading. Like you have to honor your craft of trying to get better. Don't go to one source of information, but get a variety of different opinions, weigh it against other things. And Charles had this like litmus test that he would use with people, and it's a little bit politically incorrect, which is typical Charles Poliquin if you know anything about him. But when you look at somebody, it's like one, do they have results themselves? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're learning from somebody and they've never had any results themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they've never trained themselves, that's an immediate red flag, right? So it's like you don't go to a broke financial advisor or a fat dietitian, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, like it's not to say you can't get information from them, but that's a thing. Number two, uh, do they have results with people? So if
Mm-hmm.
they actually train people, and nowadays again in this Instagram world, there's all sorts of experts online that will teach you how to run a business, they'll teach this, but they never trained anybody. It's like, how many hours of trench work do they have? And my tenure at World Health, I trained 10,000 hours of people one-on-one, small group training. Like that's how you're building your skill.
Yeah.
And then number three is, who have they learned from? So again, success leaves clues, and there's a lot of people that are giants in our industry and really skilled to learn from. And I would encourage people to pursue that and go through that. And for me, when it comes to courses, like I think that when people come into the industry, obviously I'm biased towards functional range systems. I do believe, I've spent more on continuing education than most trainers I've ever met, or no,
Mm-hmm.
at least I know guys internationally who do way more than me, but
Mm-hmm.
that I've run into these classes because I'd go to these internships and I'm like this kid. Everybody in there is like, 30 and I'm like 22 and like look like a child. And like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm just happy to be here. But I think that if you are in the business of working with Homo sapiens,
Mm-hmm.
Homo sapiens, then having an idea of how to train their internal function becomes that much more important. Because if you train general population people, you're training people who aren't going to be working in the gym a ton, maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. And if you can empower them and teach them and educate them how to actually maintain the health of their joints, that's going to work better, right? Imagine if you only worked on your fitness one time per week. Like, look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, but somebody comes and says they want to lose 100 pounds and they're going to work out once a week and they're not going to track their food. Expectations and reality are so far apart that it's not going to happen. If you can start to empower your clients and figure out, where their limitations are and then how to actually solve them, that's going to really help go a long way. And the thing is again, with minimum dose, there's clients I work with that don't, you meet the client where they're at, right? Not everybody, when you have people that want to lose weight or do whatever, and you just say, okay, so we're just going to do mobility for an hour. Like, if you don't have enough expertise to articulate the importance of that in the grand scheme of their plan, they're not going to work with you. They're not going to be interested. Yeah. They don't buy in, right? So you have to, that's where there's the, I guess the science of training and then the art of coaching, right? And they're very, very different. And so you can learn all the best methodologies and ways to approach that. But it's like, if you don't know how to work well with people, that becomes a problem. So I think that, taking courses like FRC, I know that N1, I know you've done that. I think for general population muscle development, they have some of the best content out there. I know Kaz, he's another one of these guys that learned from Charles. When you look at the strength training world, a lot of the best people have learned from Charles and taken the things that he did that were good and maybe rejected some of the things that they didn't agree with. But I think that's a good starting point for a lot of people. And then I think also you have to have a growth mind if you're going to succeed as a personal trainer or a coach. If you think that you're going to take a degree program or one certification and then that's going to be that, you're not going to last. I've seen hundreds of people come and go out of this industry that start really passionate, but this idea of always getting better yourself, for me in the last chunk of years, other than the mobility stuff, I've dived deeper into nutrition and deeper into understanding people. There was a lot of years for me that I was a black and white mindset on everything. As a coach, I wasn't very nice. I was kind of an a-hole, to be totally honest. People that know me from a long time before would know, oh yeah, just ask Jonathan what he thinks. He'll tell you exactly. No filter, no
My
nothing.
way or the highway.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely like that. And that worked for a small population of people that got really good results. But there was a bunch of people that needed my help that I wasn't able to meet where they were at because I was doing coach-centered training, not client-centered training. So in conclusion, really, if you look up a book called Change Makers, it's by Dr. John Berardi. He's the founder of Precision Nutrition. It's probably one of the best books in the world. I've read it multiple times. Every time I go back to that, I'm like, I wish I had this in 2011 because it will save you a lot of heartache and it answers everything that you would possibly need as a foundation of how to move forward as a trainer. So I could not recommend that book enough. Or, any of the courses with FRC, get a mentor, get multiple mentors, and learn more to earn more, right? So
absolutely,
that's a big thing.
Sure, and like you said, to make sure you're training yourself and testing out your programs. And I think a lot of people get burnt out in our industry as well, just because they're from a lack of learning. Things get stale, things get boring. They're doing the same things over and over again. Maybe
100%.
they're not getting the results that they expect to be getting. So it's like the learning piece is such an important aspect of our industry, I believe. Okay, well, John, where can people learn more about you? Where can they follow you? Where can they hire you for coaching?
Yeah. So I have an Instagram. I'm not the big Instagram guy. I go through these periods where I'm on it quite a bit, but that's the easiest way to access me. It's DeWolfe Performance and Health. And that's also my website, DeWolfe Performance and Health. And you can get in touch with me there, DM me, or reach out. And I do a variety of things. I do coaching mentorship. I do personal training, health coaching, online program design. My big thing is I want to help guide people to become the healthiest, strongest version of themselves. And we chat and make sure that we're a good fit for one another before we go. And that would be the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, John, for your time. Really enjoyed our conversation today, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt. That was great.